My father pointed his finger at me across the courtroom, looked the judge dead in the eye, and said, "She's a dangerous drug addict who ruined her own life." My heart stopped. Everyone in the gallery gasped, and for a split second, I thought I'd lost everything. But then the judge slowly lowered her glasses, turned to my father, and asked one single question that made his face go completely white. Before I tell you how his multi-million-dollar lie collapsed right in front of the entire courtroom, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below the city or country you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Now sit tight, grab a warm drink, and let me take you back to the day my own flesh and blood tried to steal my life. My name is Clara Sterling. I'm 32 years old, living in Seattle, Washington. For most of my adult life, I worked 14-hour days building a life completely independent of my family. I own a modest, thriving artisan bakery in Midtown, pay my rent on time, and take pride in never asking anyone for a dime. So you can imagine my absolute horror when two uniformed deputies arrived at my bakery on a Tuesday morning to serve me with emergency legal papers. My father, Richard Sterling, a man I hadn't spoken to in nearly 4 years, was suing me for emergency legal conservatorship. In the petition, he claimed under penalty of perjury that I was suffering from severe mental incompetence, severe chemical dependency, and that I was completely unfit to manage my personal or financial affairs. He wasn't just trying to get involved in my life again. He was asking the court to strip me of my basic civil rights, freeze my accounts, and hand total financial control of my existence over to him. Sitting in that sterile court hearing room days later, listening to my own father slander my name, felt like a slow-motion nightmare. Richard sat across the aisle looking like the picture of an affluent, concerned parent in his $1,000 suit. But behind his warm smile and polished posture lay the coldest, most calculating mind I'd ever known. To understand why Richard would do something so monstrous, you have to understand how the Sterling family operated. Growing up, my world was divided into two distinct tiers: my half-brother, Julian, and me. Julian was the golden child. He was handsome, smooth-talking, and spent his 20s blowing through Richard's allowance while floating from one failed luxury venture to another.
Me?
I was the daughter from Richard's first marriage. After my mother passed away when I was 10, Richard remarried, and I became an invisible roommate in his sprawling mansion. The moment I turned 18, I moved out, took 2 jobs, and built my life step by step without a single dollar of Sterling family money. Richard ran Sterling Commercial Properties, a high-profile real estate firm in Seattle. To the outside world, he was a self-made titan. But behind closed doors, his vanity had caught up with him. By the time I turned 30, quiet rumors began circulating in the city's commercial property market that Richard had made massive, reckless, over-leveraged investments in commercial office spaces right before the market plummeted. What Richard didn't want the world to know was that he was staring down the barrel of complete financial ruin. And that was when he remembered my late grandmother's estate. When my maternal grandmother passed away, when I was a teenager, she left a modest commercial trust exclusively in my name. The condition was strict. The principal amount, along with decades of accumulated interest and real estate dividends, was tied up in a blind trust until my 30th birthday. By the time it fully matured, that trust fund was worth a staggering $3.2 million. I didn't flaunt it. In fact, I barely touched it, preferring to run my bakery on its own revenue. But to a drowning man like Richard, my $3.2 million trust wasn't just my safety net, it was his life raft. Because the trust was legally untouchable by outside creditors or family members, Richard couldn't simply demand it. The only legal loophole in the trust charter allowed a court-appointed legal guardian to access and liquidate the funds if the primary beneficiary was declared permanently incapacitated or legally unfit. That was when the campaign to destroy me began. 4 months before the court date, strange things started happening. Out of nowhere, Julian began dropping by my bakery, pretending he wanted to repair our sibling relationship. He'd bring me coffee, ask about my hours, and inquire about my stress levels. I was cautious, but a foolish part of me hoped my brother was finally growing up. In reality, Julian was collecting information and setting traps. Unbeknownst to me, Julian was taking photos of my bakery on nights when I worked late preparing catering orders, capturing images of me exhausted, disheveled, and surrounded by chaotic baking flour, framing them as evidence of unhinged, manic episodes. They bribed a shady, disgraced former medical assistant to forge intake forms claiming I had sought emergency treatment for substance abuse at an out-of-state clinic 2 years prior. They even took my private, frustrated text messages to Julian about working 80-hour weeks and edited the screenshots, making it look like I was texting him frantically in the middle of the night about paranoia and hallucinations. 3 weeks before the trial, Richard invited me to his office under the guise of an olive branch. When I arrived, he slid a thick folder across his mahogany desk. Inside was a legal waiver. He looked me in the eye with a terrifyingly calm smile and said, "Clara, sign over trustee authority to Julian and me. We'll give you a monthly allowance of $3,000. If you don't, I will drag your name through every newspaper in the city, prove you're an addict, and take it anyway." I stood up, looked my father dead in the eye, and told him I would see him in court. The day of the emergency hearing arrived. The gallery of King County Superior Court was packed with local reporters, business associates, and curious onlookers. Richard had ensured the press knew about the hearing, hoping the threat of public shame would force me to break down and surrender before the judge took her seat. My father sat at the petitioner's table with his high-priced corporate legal team. I sat at the defense table with my lawyer, Sarah Vance, a sharp, quiet attorney who had spent the last 2 weeks working around the clock in complete secrecy. When the bailiff called the courtroom to order, Judge Evelyn Vance took the bench. She was a formidable woman in her 60s with sharp blue eyes, known for her absolute zero-tolerance policy for antics in her courtroom. Richard was called to the stand first. He put on an Oscar-worthy performance. He wiped a tear from his eye as his lawyer questioned him about his heartbreak as a father. "Your Honor," Richard testified, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "It pains my soul to sit here today. I love Clara, but over the last 2 years, she has completely unraveled. She works erratic hours, cut her family off, and is spending money recklessly. We have medical records and witness statements showing severe, uncontrolled substance abuse. She is a danger to herself. I am only doing this to protect my daughter before she destroys her life completely." Richard's lawyer then turned to the judge with dramatic flair. "Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows Miss Sterling is actively incapacitated by her addiction." Then, Richard looked straight across the room at me, raised his hand toward the judge, and delivered what he thought was the final nail in my coffin. "She's a dangerous drug addict who ruined her own life, and she needs to be institutionalized today." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. In the gallery, reporters were scribbling furiously. Julian sat behind Richard with a smirk on his face. They thought they had won. They thought the mountain of fake paperwork and emotional manipulation would force the judge to sign the emergency conservatorship order right then and there. Judge Vance didn't sign anything. Instead, she slowly removed her reading glasses and set them down on her leather-bound binder. She picked up a thin, blue folder that my lawyer, Sarah, had quietly submitted to the court clerk just 10 minutes before the session began. The judge opened the folder, flipped through 3 pages, and her expression changed from stern neutrality to ice-cold fury. She leaned forward over her bench, fixed her piercing gaze directly on my father, and let out a long, quiet breath. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Vance said, her voice echoing clearly through the silent courtroom, "you've given a very passionate performance today about your deep concern for your daughter's alleged addiction and financial instability." Richard straightened his tie, looking confident. "Thank you, Your Honor. I am just a desperate father." "Then perhaps you can explain something to this court," Judge Vance continued, picking up a verified document from the blue folder. "If your daughter is an active, incompetent drug addict who cannot handle money or rational decisions, why did your corporate holding company transfer $400,000 directly into her private bank account yesterday morning, labeled as legal settlement and confidentiality agreement?" The air was instantly sucked out of the room. Richard's face went from pale to ghostly white. Beside him, his high-priced lawyer froze, looking at Richard like he had just grown a second head. I Richard stammered, his confident posture collapsing instantly. Your Honor, that was a family financial restructuring. Do not lie to this court, Mr. Sterling. Judge Vance slammed her hand onto the bench, her voice like thunder. What my father didn't know was that while he was preparing his fraudulent evidence against me, Sarah and I hadn't just been playing defense. We had hired our own team. 3 days before the trial, a forensic accountant we hired uncovered that Richard's firm had illegally redirected $1.5 million in client escrow funds to cover his personal real estate debts. In a desperate panic the morning before court, Richard had ordered his CFO to wire $400,000 to my account along with an anonymous digital non-disclosure agreement, hoping to buy my silence on his corporate fraud before the conservatorship hearing even started. He didn't realize that Sarah had immediately flagged the wire transfer with the State Financial Crimes Unit and handed the certified paper trails straight to the judge. Sarah stood up calmly at our table. Your Honor, for the record, my client has also voluntarily submitted to comprehensive, court-certified medical and 12-month hair follicle drug panels administered by the Chief of Medicine at Swedish Hospital. All results are attached in Exhibit B. They are 100% negative for every substance listed in Mr. Sterling's petition. Sarah then presented the original, unedited text messages and security footage from my bakery, proving that Julian had fabricated the photos and altered the messages. Judge Vance looked down at Richard, her eyes burning with pure indignation. Mr. Sterling, Judge Vance declared, this is one of the most egregious abuses of the judicial system I have witnessed in 20 years on the bench. You did not bring this petition out of concern for your daughter. You brought this bad faith petition to steal her inheritance and silence her regarding your own fraudulent financial activities. The judge didn't just deny Richard's petition. She dismantled him right on the spot. She dismissed the conservatorship petition with prejudice, meaning Richard could never file it again. She ordered Richard to personally pay every single dollar of my legal fees, court costs, and forensic accounting expenses. Then, she turned to the court stenographer. Clerk, forward this entire record, including the forged medical documents and verified wire transfers, directly to the District Attorney's Office and the State Financial Crimes Division for immediate criminal investigation into perjury, forgery, and extortion. As the judge struck her gavel, closing the hearing, chaos erupted in the gallery. Reporters flooded out the double doors to report on the downfall of Richard Sterling. I looked over at my father. The man who had entered the courtroom acting like an untouchable titan was now sitting paralyzed at his table, staring into space as his legal team desperately tried to figure out how to handle the impending criminal charges. Julian looked like he was going to throw up. I didn't say a word to either of them. I gathered my coat, shook Sarah's hand with tears of gratitude in my eyes, and walked out of that courtroom, through the front doors with my head held high. In the months that followed, justice moved swiftly. Faced with public exposure, Richard's real estate company collapsed under the weight of investor lawsuits. The district attorney indicted both Richard and Julian for commercial fraud, conspiracy, and felony perjury. To avoid federal prison time, Richard was forced to liquidate his mansion, his luxury cars, and his remaining assets to pay off his creditors and legal fines. Julian was forced to take a job as an entry-level clerk just to pay his rent. As for me, I took a small portion of my matured trust fund and expanded my Midtown bakery, turning it into a thriving local staple that now employs 15 incredible people. I also established a legal support fund to help young adults facing financial abuse and predatory conservatorship by toxic family members. Looking back on that day in court, my father thought he was going to strip me of my rights, my money, and my dignity. But he forgot one simple truth. Real strength isn't bought with expensive suits or stolen money. It's built through honesty, hard work, and standing up for the truth even when your knees are shaking. Now, I'm curious to hear from all of you listening out there. If you were in my shoes, would you ever consider forgiving a family member who tried to ruin your life for money, or would you cut them off forever? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.